The idyllic villages that cling to our coastline. Known for their beauty and serenity.
Oh, it's wonderful to see that sailor.
Now destinations for our leisure. But once they played a vital role in our history.
This is amazing. I'm Ben Robinson, and as an archaeologist, I'm intrigued by our coastal villages because there's always a bigger story behind that idyllic postcard image.
I've come to the village of Flamborough on the Yorkshire coast, 40 miles east of York, and sitting on a rugged chalk headland that sticks out into the wild North Sea. A peaceful village today, but since prehistoric times, one that was cut off from the rest of the country by a huge man-made earthwork.
To build a defensive structure here, it's a whole community effort.
A village that looks like no other, thanks to the rock it's built from.
Chalk in Yorkshire is much harder than the chalk in southern England.
It's not soft southern chalk.
No, this is northern gritty chalk.
And a community that's learned to make the most of being out on a limb.
We feel as though we are independent because we're stuck right out of the headland.
There's a fascinating story to this village by the sea.
My skipper is Richard Emerson, whose family have lived in Flamborough and fished these waters for over 300 years.
It's a lovely bit of coast, this.
Oh, yeah, no, it's a bit of chalk in the middle of nowhere.
I'm on the coast of the East Riding of Yorkshire, and over there is the wild North Sea. Don't be fooled, it's not always like it is today, but I'm very glad the weather's with us because it's given me a very close look at this distinctive, characterful coastline. Here we have this chalky outcrop, this headland projecting 5 or 6 miles into the sea. And just beyond there is the village of Flamborough. And I'm betting that a village in this wonderful, distinctive landscape is going to have a special character and quality all of its own. Flamborough village is surrounded on the sea on 3 sides. It's about a mile from the sea, and it doesn't have a harbour, but it has 2 landing places for boats. One on the south side of the headland, one on the north side of the headland. But to the west, it looks out onto agricultural land. And it's quite reasonable to assume that as well as fishing, farming formed a big part in the formation of this village. And in fact, this is Church Farm right here. There's Chalk Farm up there. A mention of chalk reminds me that we're on a great chalky headland. And the buildings here, some of the earliest buildings, are making good use of that chalky material.
It's likely that even the first villagers to settle in Flamborough would have fished the surrounding seas. The area's long been a rich hunting ground for cod, crab, lobster and whelks. And in the fields, wheat and barley are also known to have been grown.
Flamborough had fishing, it had agriculture, it had commerce, and it's in a fairly unique situation, almost out on a limb, projecting out into the North Sea. And I want to find out how this geography influenced the development of the place since its earliest origins.
Flamborough has natural defences on 3 sides from its steep, imposing cliffs. But for thousands of years, the village was also effectively cut off from the mainland by a remarkable and mysterious earthwork dug across the landscape. Dane's Dyke. This incredible man-made ditch and bank is on average 7 metres tall and runs 2.5 miles from north to south. It's most likely a defensive and boundary structure, but its origins are uncertain.
This is an enormous structure, all dug by hand, probably way back in prehistory, more than 3,000 years ago into the Bronze Age. And it's quite a formidable obstacle. If you're an invading force or cattle rustlers or a hostile tribe of some kind coming this way, you're suddenly confronted by this deep ditch, this huge climb. If there's folks up here with spears and arrows, you're going to be in trouble. When this was first constructed, it wasn't covered in trees and foliage. It was a stark white chalk boundary running across the landscape. That's a heck of a statement. That's saying, over there, that's you, that's your world, your territory. Over here, this is us, this is our world and our territory. Keep out.
Caroline Barry-Smith from Museum of London Archaeology is an expert on coastal heritage. She's researched the Dane's Dyke.
So here we've got a great cleft through the chalk. They've actually physically had to excavate the chalk, pile it up to create this long boundary, this territorial statement. And it's a heck of a lot of work.
Yes, this is a fully organised community to do something like this. This isn't just a group of individuals thinking, I know, I'm going to build a defensive structure just here, or I'm going to build my boundary to my land just here. It's a whole community effort.
And a big community. It's not just a few dozen people doing this. This must be hundreds of people. And we're going back maybe 3,000 years here. This is Bronze Age people, potentially.
Yes, and Flamborough Head, like many of these peninsulas, they have a very strategic position, and people who built this area up around Dane's Dyke knew this.
I would love to get a massive excavator and dig a huge section through Dane's Dyke. Find out how people have worked with this landscape and with this nature.
We'd love to, you know, but it's just too massive. However, what we can do is go to the beach and look at where the sea meets the chalk.
Let's take a look.
OK. We have a beautiful cross-section here, and you can really see the different stages of how sediments have settled and what was part of the dike and what was before the dike.
Yeah, so all this stuff, this silty, sandy stuff, it gets quite muddy here. This is all the fill at the bottom of Dane's Dyke, at the bottom of that ravine. But this is the chalk underneath. Just that little bit harder, quite a lot harder.
It is indeed, and this is the reason why Flamborough Head is still here. It's because the bedrock here is exposed chalk, whereas we have down here one of Europe's most erosive coastlines. It's all topped off with clay, and clay erodes. It disappears about 2 metres a year, whereas Flamborough Head is relatively stable, just because it's chalk.
If I was looking for a building material, it'd be great chalk blocks like that.
Yes, absolutely. And people thousands of years ago knew this.
Yeah.
By the medieval period, the village had developed into a small fishing and farming community. And it was built using the same chalk that ancient settlers had dug into and piled up to make Dane's Dyke.
You perhaps don't think of it as the best building material because you think of powdery chalk on a blackboard, but it can be very resilient. And I'm going to see a building that dates back around 700 years, built of chalk.
Now a shadow of its former glory, this ruin was once a heavily fortified chalk structure that would have dominated the Flamborough skyline. It's not open to the public, but I've been given special permission to look around.
What I'm looking at here dates to the 14th century. And although it's ruined now, I get the impression of a tall structure, great thick walls there rising up. But I'm looking here at the basement level, I think. You see those, what look like arches? Well, those are springers for vaulting, barrel vaulting. And there would have been storerooms here, perhaps precious goods stored away, and then apartments above, rising up. And this tower, stark white in the landscape, would have been making quite a statement here.
This fortified manor house was built and owned by the Constable family. With close links to royalty, they were possibly the most powerful landowners that the village has ever seen.
These were important people. And looking around, there was an entire complex of buildings here. I can see humps and bumps everywhere I look. Bits of foundation poking through the grass. There's remains of buildings everywhere, but I need a view from above to make sense of the site. I've got a LiDAR image here, and LiDAR is beams of light fired with precision from an aircraft to build up a map of the terrain. And what it's showing is what I suspected. I can see the foundations of buildings here. The whole site would have been surrounded by defences, a curtain wall, a ditch, perhaps even partly moated as well. And in fact, accounts here tell us that there was a great hall, a lord's parlour, a mill house, a courthouse, a great barn.
Redeveloped from the first half of the 1300s onwards, this was an important site for the Constables. At the centre of their vast estate, it not only provided solid defensive protection, but it also boldly announced their wealth and power.
The Constables family were big players in medieval England. They got their name from being the stewards, the custodians of strategic castles. But in the 16th century, they fell out with the king, as many powerful families eventually did. And when the last male heir died, this site fell into disrepair and ruin.
By the late 1700s, the decaying building was being used to house farm animals. And over the years, the chalk stones from the once proud castle were plundered. It's likely the villagers would have used them to build their own cottages. And this unique chalk character can still be seen in the village today.
We've got chalk boundary walls, we've got chalk outbuildings and barns, chalk cottages. This cottage shows beautifully the transition between the old traditional chalk building here and the newfangled brick that comes in. There comes a point in the 19th century where local brickyards can start to produce brick a lot more cheaply. But here, they're hedging their bets. They're between the two. They've used the old chalk rubble. You can see its courses there, but the front is clad in brick, this lovely red brick. And across the street there, you can see the opposite. The gable end has been rebuilt in brick, whereas the front of the cottage, that's clearly chalk rubble.
All over Flamborough, there are clues to how this community grew up and how it transformed over the years. But it's the chalk stone buildings that really stand out. And I've found another example that I suspect dates back to around 200 years after the Constable family had left the village.
Now, this is an interesting house. And although it's got a new roof on it, those new pan tiles, I can see, look, it's slightly bowed, it ripples slightly, and that implies older timbers underneath. And in fact, it looks like it may have been space for another door there. So did it even start as one large building? Perhaps it was several different buildings together.
It's difficult to date the exact origins of this house from what I can see on the outside, so I'm hoping I can get some more clues on the inside.
Okay, oh, some interesting joists here. Quite rustic looking, and then a thin, finer one. Also, very wide boards on the ceiling here. And that is usually a sign of age because boards have tended to get thinner over time. Oh, beam there, and they've had to prop it to stop it sagging. You can see how those doors, they have to fit into the angle of the roof. So I'm getting the sense of a building that's changed over time, perhaps become a little bit posher over time, starting life as some humble cottages and then being revamped into something else.
Owners Claire Francis and Warwick Bramley
Hi there.
are renovating Manor Cottage and have made some interesting archaeological finds that may be clues to when their home was built.
It's a fascinating house.
Oh, thank you. Yes, we think so as well.
And do you have any idea of when it first appears on the records?
Well, we found it on a map of 1771, which is Thomas Jeffrey's map of Yorkshire.
If it was on a map of the late 18th century, it was already here. And so that puts it, you know, a bit earlier still.
The previous owners told us that they perhaps used to kill pigs in the back garden where our toilet is now, downstairs, and that's where they were slaughtered. And we have found quite a few bones, haven't we, when we've been digging, and they do look like animal bones, thankfully. So it sort of adds up that that might be accurate.
That was a cartwheel penny from late 1700s.
And then little shoe buckles and belt buckles.
And the item that's really caught my eye is this particular belt buckle. Found in Claire and Warwick's back garden, it's likely to be late medieval or Tudor, which would place us somewhere between the late 1300s and early 1600s.
It's such a rich history. And you'll keep looking.
Yeah.
Happy hunting.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Claire and Warwick's finds and the architectural features in their home suggest that it could date back around 300 or 400 years, when records show that the village was largely made up of farmers and fishermen. There were 4 alehouses and 10 registered fishing boats. And throughout all this time, Flamborough's unique position on the east coast on top of a chalky outcrop continued to shape its appearance.
And this is by far the most prominent and amazing chalk building of the lot. And it's certainly a test of chalk construction. It's exposed to the elements up here, the wind and the rain. And I can see the original design includes steps to try and help shed the rainwater to stop it eroding down the face of the structure. There's been some patchwork repairs, new facing put on to help the building become a bit more resilient. It's just extraordinary.
Andrew Jones is an archaeologist and a member of the Friends of the Chalk Tower Society, which looks after this incredible building.
Andrew, this is an extraordinary structure. When was it built?
This was built in the late 17th century, 1670s.
It's marvellous that it's still standing. It's a testament to the construction of the time and of the qualities of the chalk.
Yeah, and that's an important point because the chalk in Yorkshire is much, much harder than the chalk in most of the southern England.
So it's good Yorkshire chalk. It's not soft southern chalk.
No, this is hard, northern gritty chalk, yeah.
Yeah. So what's its story?
It was built by a guy called John Clayton and his partner George Blake, who wrote to the king and said, we want to build a whole series of towers all the way down the east coast of England for improving navigation and ship-to-shore communications. And the idea was that the ship owners would benefit so much from these improved communications. They would pay a tax to the people who maintain and look after the towers. But in fact, the ship owners were pretty hard-nosed businessmen, not surprising, and they just refused to pay anything. So the poor old John Clayton and George Blake went bankrupt before all these towers that they wanted to build were finished. So it never was an operational system. But they were still important for the government. And since the 19th century, government agents have been based out here, the coast guards, the preventative officers who were really about preventing smuggling.
I love the fact that the government was interested in this place, keeping law and order against what was probably a population that wasn't that interested in having too much interference.
Yeah, they're independent-minded people, fisher folk, aren't they?
Despite the government having long kept a watchful eye on the villagers, many of the locals still found ways of getting around the law.
In the 1700s, there was a lively trade between Yorkshire and Holland across the North Sea. Wool would be shipped out from Yorkshire and the boats would come back laden with luxury goods like tea, brandy, gin. Now the thing was, these goods were expensive. If you avoid paying the tax, you can make a little more profit. Well, actually quite a lot more profit. And all sorts of tales circulated in this part of the world about how to smuggle these goods in under the eyes of customs officials. Is it all right to step aboard?
Yeah, of course you can, yeah.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Skipper Richard Emerson has researched the village's smuggling past. And we're heading out to find some of the secret nooks and crannies that would have been used to hide valuable contraband.
It's a stunning view, isn't it?
It is.
All these caves. Any one of these could be a smuggler's cave.
Yeah.
So keep my eyes out for pirates and smugglers.
Yeah.
What are you picking up today, aren't you going to say?
No, I'll say it up to
Well, it looks to me like you're heading straight for the cliffs here.
Yeah, we are at the moment. Yeah.
I'm getting slightly worried.
Yeah.
Oh, I can see there's a cave, an entrance opening up.
Smugglers used these very caves to land their goods, ferrying them in on small boats from the bigger ships out at sea. One of Flamborough's most notorious maritime crooks was Captain George Fagg. He claimed to be invincible, but in July 1777, his schooner, the Kent, was captured off Flamborough Head. Its cargo, over 500 sacks of tea and almost 2,000 barrels of brandy.
Whoa! We're completely out of sight, aren't we, from the sea? We're well hidden in this cave.
Yeah, we are now.
And I can imagine you could bring stuff in here if you knew what you were doing, land it at the back there, hide it away.
Yeah, you could, yeah.
At lower tide, you could haul a boat into there.
Yeah.
Take your barrels off, your tobacco, your brandy, anything, your tea. Stick it in the back of the cave, and then you're hidden away. I mean, you know.
It's a cavern of caves. It ain't just that one. There's caves, everywhere.
That's incredible. And it was worth their while to do it, presumably.
Well, yeah, because you have to get a living doing something, don't you? Because sometimes fishing, it isn't always reliable.
Yeah.
You need to have an alternative income.
Yeah. So do you think people, to a certain extent, were turning a blind eye to it and saying, well, fair play to them?
Yeah. That's what they did. That was the life, wasn't it?
Do you think there's something in the spirit of the people that encourages this independence, this free trading?
Yeah, we feel as though we are independent because they're stuck right on the end of the headland.
The location of Flamborough, a village on the edge, meant that it developed a certain independence. And by the 1800s, it seemed to have become almost entirely self-sufficient.
Parts of Flamborough have a really quite urban feel to them. There are these squares with tightly packed terraces of cottages, but it's the number of commercial premises around that's really surprising. A survey in 1822 said there were around 900 people living in the village. Half of these were involved in fishing, but there were also 16 farmers. There were tailors, there were butchers, there were grocers, there were 4 shoemakers. There was even a dedicated straw hat maker. They really did have everything they needed here. Bridlington's just 4 miles down the road, but you've got a virtual town here.
Even with all these enterprises, its coastal location meant one industry would dominate above all others in Flamborough. From as early as the 13th century, well into the middle of the 1900s. Fishing. But with powerful North Sea currents and hazardous underwater rocks, local knowledge was absolutely essential. And this was handed down through families over many generations. John Stevenson's ancestors had been fishing out of Flamborough for over 300 years.
John, this is absolutely beautiful, isn't it? I mean, it's a lovely place to come and visit, but this was a working coast, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. I mean, it was born into you to be able to net crab pots, splice lines, whip hooks. You know, you were with your father and grandfather. And
it's really in the blood then.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
To prize a living out of the sea, I mean, it wasn't always like this, was it? It wasn't always flat, calm and beautiful conditions.
It's one of the most notorious headlands on the east coast. You've got 4 sets of tide around this headland. It tests your ability as a fisherman at times, yeah.
Do you think this sort of environment builds a distinctive type of character?
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. You know, you have to have that mindset in you.
Yeah.
You know, not to give in so easy.
Yeah. And what does it feel like to be part of that tradition?
It's a privilege, I think, more than anything else, and it's very proud to be part of it.
Flamborough has been shaped by geography, by geology, and it's not surprising that a place sitting on a headland jutting out into the North Sea, separated from the mainland by Dane's Dyke, should gain a reputation for independence, resilience, self-sufficiency.
It's a village made from the rock it stands on, and it's a testament to the strength of the materials and the people that built it that so many of its ancient structures still stand, meaning that Flamborough's unique identity lives on to this day.